Think of it this way. U.S. diplomats, U.S. military personnel are really on the front line around the world in carrying that flag of the moral high ground, the historic moral high ground of America when it comes to human rights, when it comes to not murdering people in cold blood, so to speak. So if the president does not take a strong public stand, it is going to be more difficult for America to hold that moral high ground, for American diplomats, American military commanders to operate around the world and tell their counterparts in various countries that they really have to adhere to these standards.
Hello, I'm Erica Hill. Kate Baldwin is off today. President Trump sending his top diplomat to Saudi Arabia to get some answers about a missing Washington Post journalist. This morning, the world is waiting for those answers, and what follows could be the biggest decision of Donald Trump's presidency. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo meeting earlier in Riyadh with the Saudi king and crown prince to talk about the fate of their critic, Jamal Khashoggi, as pressure mounts on the kingdom for an explanation. Now, the men were all smiles for the cameras, as you can see. As sources tell CNN, the Saudi regime is preparing to admit Khashoggi was killed while under interrogation. And a morbid, gruesome clue appearing overnight. Video of people carrying mops and buckets into the Saudi consulate in Istanbul, where Khashoggi was last seen alive 2 weeks ago. President Trump promising to severely punish the Saudis if they in fact killed Khashoggi, and one of the president's senior advisors telling CNN the way President Trump handles this crisis could be his most consequential decision yet. So far, though, he says he doesn't know what's happened.
I just don't know. I'm going to have to see what they say. And we're working very close with Saudi Arabia and with Turkey, and they're working together to figure out what happened. And they want to know what happened also. I heard that report, but nobody knows if it's an official report. So far, it's just the rumor of a report coming out.
CNN Sam Kiley is live in Riyadh. So what more do we know this morning, Sam, about the meetings that Secretary Pompeo had today?
Well, the secretary visited first with King Salman, who is the elderly head of state here, who had already handed over most of the reins of power to his son, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. That was a 15-minute meeting. He was attended also by the Saudi foreign minister, who went with him, where he met MBS Mohammed bin Salman, the real power in the land. That went on for about 40 minutes. On the way in, Erica, I think there was a telling exchange, perhaps, when Mohammed bin Salman, who's speaking first here, he says, "We're really strong and old allies, so we face our challenges together. The past, the day of, tomorrow." And Pompeo answers, "Absolutely." Now, of course, America's top diplomat could not really have said, well, we'll wait and see. But nonetheless, we do hear from sources inside the meeting on the American side that there was a candid exchange of views, which is diplomatic speak for some fairly firm remarks. But how firmly they went beyond saying what they're saying in public, which is they want to see a transparent and timely resolution to the investigation into what happened to the Washington Post columnist, Erica, remains to be seen. But nonetheless, just in the last few moments, the Anadolu Agency, the semi-official news agency in Turkey, has reported that the Saudi consul has left Istanbul and is already flying back here to Riyadh. Erica?
All right, Sam Kiley with the latest for us from Riyadh. Thank you. Let's take a closer look now at what the senior Trump advisor, who said this may be the most consequential decision of his presidency. CNN's Barbara Starr has that new reporting for us. So what more did this source have to say to you? Because those are some very strong words, Barbara.
Strong words indeed, Erica, from someone who is in a position to advise the president directly. And clearly what we're beginning to see is that part of the administration willing to show a little more public view about how concerned they are about this. This person telling us how the president handles the Saudi situation now could be the most consequential foreign policy decision of his presidency. And why is that? Well, look, it's common sense, isn't it? You are going to have countries now like North Korea, Russia, other strongman countries around the world watching to see how the United States responds to this situation. Think of it this way. U.S. diplomats, U.S. military personnel are really on the front line around the world in carrying that flag of the moral high ground, the historic moral high ground of America when it comes to human rights, when it comes to not murdering people in cold blood, so to speak. So if the president does not take a strong public stand, it is going to be more difficult for America to hold that moral high ground, for American diplomats, American military commanders to operate around the world and tell their counterparts in various countries that they really have to adhere to these standards. Nobody knows what the president's going to decide at this point, and that's one of the concerns. What does he decide? And even more deeply than that, where does Saudi Arabia go from here? One of America's most close allies for decades. Now, what will the succession plan be? Will this strongman crown prince hold on to power, or will there be other princes in the kingdom who are unsettled by this situation and may try to reduce his influence, may try to reduce his power, even as his elderly father, the king, may find it more and more difficult to rule as he grows on in age? Erica?
So much at stake. Barbara Starr with the latest for us from the Pentagon. Barbara, thank you. Joining me now to discuss further, CNN Chief International Correspondent Clarissa Ward, CNN Chief Political Correspondent Dana Bash, and CNN Counterterrorism Analyst, former CIA and FBI official Phil Mudd. Phil also worked for the Saudi Interior Ministry after leaving the U.S. government. As we look at all of this, it has now been 2 weeks since Khashoggi was seen. The story now, Clarissa, after 2 weeks is that this is an interrogation gone wrong. Why did it take 2 weeks to get to that explanation?
Well, and don't forget, Erica, even though we're hearing that this is the explanation they're planning to offer, they haven't actually offered it yet. So 2 weeks in, with news already having leaked out that this is going to be their official story, we have yet to see Saudi authorities stand up to the international community, and particularly to the family of Jamal Khashoggi, to the Washington Post, and also to Turkey, and explain exactly what happened. Meanwhile, we're seeing Turkish authorities once again starting to leak little bits of information. We heard the Turkish President Erdogan today saying that on the premises of the consulate there were traces of toxic material found. He also hinted at a sort of quick cover-up job from the Saudis, saying that they had painted over some things. The Turks would like at this stage, I think, Erica, to know where's the body? When can this investigation begin in a serious manner? And how can it begin without a transparent sense from the horse's mouth of what exactly what happened?
And that, in fact, the question of where's the body. Senator Marco Rubio asking the exact same question this morning. Phil, you've got that happening as this explanation that we, as Clarissa points out, we expect to be given is that this is an interrogation gone wrong. What does this really tell you happened, Phil?
A couple things here. First of all, the Saudis are operating with impunity. You go overseas, and they're talking about an operation gone wrong. They're going overseas with people as part of that Saudi party that included medical personnel. Clearly, they anticipated not an interview, but as you say, interrogation. That is physical duress of somebody in an overseas consulate. That's remarkable. That's not a rogue operation. That's planning beforehand, before you leave the Saudi capital of Riyadh, that you're going to push somebody around in an interview in a foreign country. The other thing it tells me may be more significant. That is, the first interview the Secretary of State had was with the king. The king's in his early 80s. He's not going to have any answers. The power here, as we've talked about, is Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince. I've got to believe he'd authorize this. That tells me a lot about it, what he thinks about how the Americans will react. He must have thought that we would let this go.
In terms of how Americans are reacting, I just want to play a little bit of what Senator Lindsey Graham had to say this morning. Take a listen.
This guy's got to go. Saudi Arabia, if you're listening, there are a lot of good people you can choose, but MBS has tainted your country and tainted himself.
A strong statement there that he has to go, Dana, saying the Saudis, are you listening? Is it your sense that Lindsey Graham is speaking only to the Saudis with that statement, or is he also perhaps trying to appeal to President Trump?
That's a very astute question. Everybody, and he's trying to clearly make the case that if somebody like Lindsey Graham, who has been a big advocate for arms sales, for example, to Saudi, if he is saying enough already, this guy has to be replaced, then you can bet that there is going to be bipartisan support for that notion, which is why how President Trump deals with this is about as important and delicate as it gets to when you look at the broader U.S. relationship with not just Saudi, but the very complicated relationship with all the other countries in the region and how that puzzle goes together. And look, I mean, it's an unusual situation, not unprecedented, but an unusual situation for American politicians and leaders, particularly in foreign policy, to be saying to a country that has been an ally, Saudi Arabia, you got to get rid of this guy, especially since the Trump administration has, wrapped their arms around him with a giant warm hug as somebody who is going to be the next great thing to reform, to change the way the country is going. And I think either Phil or Clarissa had said something really important, which is they're used to getting these hugs for the past year and a half from the Trump administration, and maybe they just didn't realize how big of a problem it would be to, intentionally or not, kill an American journalist and to throw into the wind every bit of diplomatic norms or human decency that America has historically held dear.
That part of it is fascinating to me. This sort of the potential that this was all, in many ways, a miscalculation, not only in terms of how upset, and rightfully so, people would be around the world, not just the family of Jamal Khashoggi, but so many other people and the concerns that brings. But Clarissa, too, the fact that it has, and I keep hammering this point because it's so important, it has been 2 weeks. It took 2 weeks to actually get even some sort of a semblance of an idea of where we're going. And that, as we know, was not the story from the beginning. So that gross miscalculation just in terms of the impact here, I find that surprising, Clarissa.
If you look at the historical record of Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince, I think it'll help to alleviate some of your surprise, Eric. This is a man who has waged a war in Yemen that has killed tens of thousands, that has left millions on the brink of famine. This is a man who has waged a sort of diplomatic war with Canada over a tweet that he didn't like, who has arrested female driver activists after allowing women to drive because he didn't like the way they went about it, who essentially kidnapped the Lebanese prime minister, forced him to resign on television. This is not a man who has shown any sense that he understands the limits of his power and the boundaries of human decency, nor is there any sense that the Trump administration has been particularly effective in conveying to him and to the rest of the Saudi leadership that there are certain kinds of behavior that are simply not accepted on the international world stage. So it's entirely possible from where I'm standing and what I'm seeing to understand that he would never imagine that there would have been a problem, that one day Jamal Khashoggi would go into that consulate to get some visa papers to get married and would never again leave the consulate. He would probably be abducted and renditioned to Saudi Arabia, where he would face some kind of a show trial for his alleged dissidence. This, as far as the Crown Prince would be thinking and using the parameters of the logic we've seen him use before, is simply par for the course, Erica.
So to your point there, too, do we have a better sense of, I mean, we touched on this a little bit, but these conversations that Secretary of State Pompeo is there to have, how much of that is the message, do you believe, that is coming with Secretary Pompeo to MBS specifically? Clarissa, I'll throw that one to you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Repeat that again. Sorry, I thought
just
you were asking that.
So no, sorry. So how much of that message, just to your point there, how much of that message do we think could actually be coming from Secretary Pompeo at this point to MBS, that this is outside the norm? This is not what we can continue to do. We cannot continue to turn our head the other way. Is that message really coming, or are some of these meetings in many ways more of a photo op?
Well, on the surface, from what we've seen publicly, we saw lots of smiles and handshaking and sort of nice talk about jet lag. That is normal, to have a sort of public convivial face and then privately deliver some of the tough love or the hard message. We are hearing from the Pool reporter that a message was delivered that there needs to be an impartial investigation, that it needs to be thorough, and it needs to be timely. I don't, however, know, and I don't have the sense from anything I've heard coming out of the White House yet, that they have really held their feet to the fire and said, you know, exactly what you were just saying, that this is unacceptable. Of course, there are a host of strategic considerations here, Erica. There's cooperation on Iran, cooperation on terror, $110 billion in weapons deals. So they're trying to weigh up you know, the calculus being what's more important, delivering this message, alienating an ally, and it's a very difficult line to walk.
And that has been...
Go ahead, Dana.
Just real quick, that has been the sort of conflict that President Trump in particular has been trying to figure out how to navigate, because he is, admittedly, a transactional guy. So his initial focus on arms sales, his focus since the beginning of his administration on fighting terrorism, that is more in his natural wheelhouse. Being a moral leader, the way that America has been expected to be on basic issues of human rights, never mind diplomatic norms, making sure somebody is safe in a consulate, never mind journalists, never mind freedom to travel, all of those basics, that is not something that comes, I think, naturally to this president. And that is why this is a big, big test on how much he's going to lean into that, which is an expectation in a very, very, very robust bipartisan way, the other branch of Congress, and I mean the other branch of government, the United States Congress.
And that is why we hear a senior advisor to the president telling our own Barbara Starr that this may in fact be the most consequential decision of his presidency. Dana Bash, Phil Mudd, Clarissa Ward, appreciate your insight always. Thank you.
Thank you.
Up next.